economic situation. It's Rafi, not Rami, but other than that, all is well. We are beginning this conference with a discussion about the financial situation in Israel and worldwide, and this will be the backdrop for everything that we discuss during the rest of the day, because the world is facing enormous changes and threats that we will have to cope with in the next year and certainly in the future as well. But just some perspective. He's looking for the clicker. We'll start with some background, and in a moment I'll be able to show you the data as well. The world, now here it is. We are living in a time of globalization, and globalization was very typical of the world order and has been in the past few decades. And this was a welcome process and welcome development, because the result of globalization was the reduction of poverty throughout the world. There was significant expansion of world trade, which was an engine for economic growth. And of course, the economies around the world grew as a result. This shows what happened to poverty during the globalization era. In the 1980s, there were 2 billion people who lived on an income of less than $1.9 per day. This is the definition of poverty that is defined by the World Bank. There are different definitions, but they all show similar pictures. Despite the growth in global populations, the population and all the developments, poverty has shrunken significantly as a result of globalization. The latest data we have here is for 2018. There are only 600 million people living in poverty, which is still a very high number. But you can see what has happened over the years as a result of the global order over these years. This is the development of global trade in the developed economies. One line shows import, and the other shows total export, and we can see that there has been significant increase over the years. Please, can someone please find the clicker? I really need it so that I can proceed. The question is, what is happening today? And we can see the impact of COVID-19. We can see the very quick end of COVID-19. And the question is, where is global trade going now? Because this will be key for the continued growth of global economy. And there are many signs now that indicate that we are facing a new world order, not only from the security perspective and from the political perspectives, but also from the economic perspective. The transition from globalization back to nationalism began before the war in Ukraine. It started with Trump, with his slogan, America First, and with the UK and Brexit leaving the EU. It became even more severe with the pandemic and the problems with the supply chains. And the war is actually presenting us with the danger of returning to the old world order, when there was still an iron curtain that separated the large blocks and was damaging to the development of the world economy. And we also have a new player, which is China, and we don't know exactly what role it will play in the new world. So far, it is sitting quietly on the side, and it's difficult to read the map and to determine what role China will play in the future, even though it is clear that they will be crucial for the global economy. What appears to be is that global trade will decline, but on the other hand, there will be more competition in the very basic markets such as energy and food, and as a result, the prices of these products will increase. As a result of that, we will see a decline in growth rates and possibly finding ourselves in a world that is similar to the oil crisis of the 1970s. We have recession on the one hand and inflation on the other, which is a very problematic combination and difficult to deal with. Some preliminary data about growth. Here you can see rates of growth in the GDP in different countries over the years, and you can see the impact of the financial crisis in 2008 and the impact of COVID-19 in 2020 and the quick recovery of the global economy in 2021. And a lot of that is compensation for things that weren't done in 2020. But we certainly can see, but you can also see the beginning of 2022, and this is temporary data. I put the data in for Israel just yesterday afternoon when it was published that during the first quarter of 2022, the GDP in Israel declined. All of the assessments are that there will be that the growth rates will slow down all over the world. The United States has shown signs of recession, in Europe as well. We still don't have estimates for the entire world, but this is the beginning. And the war in Ukraine broke out with this in the background. We can see the shock and changes in prices that are critical for the world. On the one hand, we have the dramatic damage that was caused to the supply chain. At the beginning, they thought it was temporary and the world would be able to overcome it quite quickly. But the truth is we still haven't overcome it. And the ports are full of containers. The ships are stuck in different places around the world. And we have not yet been able to resolve the supply chain shortages. This is continuing to impact prices around the world because as the supply decreases, demand increases, and that's the most basic lesson in economy. And this is what happened to oil prices as a result of the war. We see prices that have climbed over $100 per barrel, and this seems to be a phenomenon that will not change anytime soon. There is also a shock to the balance between supply and demand of oil. And this is what's happening to the global prices of food. In Ukraine supplies a very large percentage of the wheat and other basic commodities to the world and is no longer able to supply these products. And as a result, the prices of food and other products, as I said before, are growing. Saying that, I would like to talk about several issues that if they happen at the same time, the world could suffer a perfect storm. And the outcome of this storm would be world recession on a very severe level, impacting the entire world as a result of growing inflation. And this is a combination that no economist or anyone else to deal with because it's very hard to handle. Things that what's good for proactivity is bad for inflation and vice versa. So you don't know what to deal with first. Here you can see what happened with the inflation rates around the world. Inflation is currently growing at a very rapid pace. Initially, they thought it was temporary and just the outcome of very specific economies, supply chains, oil, food, and it was assumed that this would settle down. But as time goes by, it becomes clear that this phenomenon is continuing. On the contrary, we're facing a significant risk of inflation, and price increases will affect the expectations of the world population. And when there are firms and economies and civilians who expect an increase in prices, this process it accelerates this process, which I studied as part of my research on inflation. And it's very difficult to stop that process unless you do something dramatic that involves stopping economic activity. This is the monetary policy that has been typical of the past years. We were living in a world of zero interest rates, with some slight deviations, but overall we've lived in a world of zero interest. And in that case, it was very difficult, on one hand, to assess the value of companies, particularly technology companies, and it is unclear whether the inflated prices reflect the actual value of the companies, or is it a phenomenon that is related with the bubble characteristics. And recently, we've seen significant declines in these companies, in the stock shares of these companies. It is very clear to all of us, every economist just starting out knows that in a world of full employment, full occupation, which is the world in which we're living, and in a world of developing inflation, the interest rates, the current interest rate is completely unsuitable. We have to adjust the interest rates to the new reality that has been created. And this is the greatest challenge that I will connect shortly with what we're talking about. During the war, the world before the crisis, if we would ask an economist what the interest rates should be in case of full employment and inflation is about 2%. Everyone would have said that the interest rate should be about 4%, and that's around where it was here and in other places around the world. There is an economist from Stanford who developed a formula that it can be used to calculate, or could have been used to calculate, what interest rate should be under different economic conditions. Inflation of 2% and full employment, then interest rate should be around 4%. So today, inflation is way beyond 2%. But the interest rates are still around zero. It's true that adjustments are starting to be made, but this adjustment process, because of everything that has happened since 2008, no one knows which direction the interest rates should be. We don't know what the interest rates are that are most suitable for a current reality. It clearly should be higher than they currently are, but it's not clear how far to go. And as a result, there's a lot of nervousness in the market. There's a lot of instability because the markets don't know which direction the policies will go and what levels interest rates will reach. And this unrest, this instability is the cause of what is happening in the capital market. We see dramatic increase and dramatic decreases that are as they constantly look for the balance. This is the Fed challenge. Inflation over 8%, interest rates around 0%. And how do we close that gap? This is the greatest challenge that is being faced by defining monetary policies. How do you define the ideal interest rates without significantly shocking the global market? And it's a very difficult decision to make. What's very clear to me is that this policy has to be transparent. It has to be clear as possible in the markets in order to reduce uncertainty. The central banks have to give guidance about the direction in which interest rates are going so that the markets can adapt themselves accordingly. Since 2008, because of the zero interest rates, it has become addicted to zero interest, meaning that money has no cost. And we are now in a situation in which We have someone who's addicted to drugs, and we have to help them. They need to withdraw. And we have to we have to learn how to live with the excess liquidity of the money. We need this money because right now the situation is being translated into inflation. And Israel is on a small scale. Israel is facing the same problem. Inflation, it does not match the interest rates, even though inflation in Israel is relatively moderate here. What is helpful in Israel is that we have the gas, which has moderated the energy blow that the rest of the world is facing, meaning that inflation is high, but not as high as in other places. However, we don't see that this is going to stabilize. What are the three risks that may be translated into what I called before a perfect storm? On the one hand, it will be a drop in the stock shares, increase in interest rates. The increase in interest rates will affect the price of stock shares, especially those that, as I said before, their prices grew because of the zero interest rates. We're already seeing this phenomenon. If you don't believe me, look what happened to the Facebook stock share, the Netflix shares, the Amazon shares. All these shares have crashed, including a large percentage of our high-tech shares. Again, we are facing something that we understood in the first decade of the 21st century. If this oxygen pipeline that feeds the high-tech industry in Israel, if it is stopped, we realize that our growth engine could be stopped as well. Look at what's happening to housing prices. The zero interest rates have increased demand for housing because it was an asset that could be used to protect your money. And there were distortions in the investment funds. There were a lot of money was used for risky purposes, and attempts were made to preserve housing prices, and the result was an increase in housing prices, which is a global phenomenon as well. And here in Israel as well, we are also seeing something similar. The previous slide showed the price levels, and here we see the pace of the increase. We've seen an increase in 15% in housing prices in the last year. And the last risk is what will happen with the government debt. Since 2008 until today, the fiscal policy was that the enormous efforts were made to cope with the crisis of 2008 and the pandemics. The deficits were increased significantly and were financed by taking loans. We see something similar in Israel, but at a much lower level. And the debt levels in the Western world today are similar to those that happened during the world wars, even though now we don't have wars on similar scale. What will happen if you recycle those loans if the interest rates increase, which will happen because we said that has to happen? So far, it was very easy for governments. They would take loans at close to zero interest rates to finance the deficits. But if interest rates are higher, then they will have to recycle loans at very high fiscal price. And it is very possible that some of the countries, since this is a global trend, at least in the West, they will have a hard time recycling those loans. And I don't think that we're facing the situation that Greece faced, but this is the syndrome. And economies will not be able to repay their debts. and a debt crisis may develop on a global scale. So to summarize, what is the perfect storm? A perfect storm is a combination of three things that if they happen at the same time, we will be in trouble. One, the stock market crash. There are already signs of that happening. Second, an increase in interest rates in the housing market, a drop in the demand for housing, difficulty of contractors to finance themselves because over the last decade, they've become accustomed to finance themselves with zero interest rates, and some contractors may find it difficult to complete their projects. And a debt crisis, which may occur as a result of countries being unable to repay their loans. And if those three things happen at the same time, we will be facing an entirely different world, a world in which, as I said at the beginning, there will be a decrease in global growth, an increase in poverty, social instability, as a result of these geopolitical incidents that we will talk about for the rest of the day. Thank you very much.